So today is more of a foundations and beginner programming and stuff, and also talking about expectations of entering your first meet and things of that nature. So it can be for beginners, it can also be for intermediate because of the dynamic of actually setting up a program. Can venture into a bunch of different topics and stuff. So as far as programming goes, if you guys do your own programming or venture out to get a coach or anything like that, you want to think first things first is the structure. And in between the structure, you want to have short-term goals and long-term goals within your plan. That way you can build your program to suit whatever your goals are. So as far as a long-term goal goes, what do you guys think would be a good long-term goal to have when setting up your program? This is an interactive seminar, guys. So
world champion of the world.
Okay. So it's good to have like really long-term goals like that, but in terms of thinking of things in like macrocycles and mesocycles and microcycles, which are the different phases of training, you want to think of it in yearly goals. That would be like as long-term as you're gonna get things. So every season has like an importance of competition and where you want to peak for it, right? So if there's a meet or if there's a competition that you want to be at your all-time best for, that would be the main priority of the yearly training. So for a good example would be like Olympic lifters or anyone in the Olympics, they have their training set up in 4-year spurts. So all their training that they do is geared towards that one day, 4 years from the day they start. So that's a very long-term perspective as far as like how you want to define things. And then from there, you have your short-term goals and stuff like that. And your short-term goals are what's going to define your mesocycles and your macrocycles. And a macrocycle is just a fancy way of saying like a 12-week training block. A mesocycle is a fancy way of saying like a 4-week training block within the 12 weeks. And then a microcycle is like a 1-week block. So having that short-term goal of like, my next 12 weeks is going to be hypertrophy based, I want to build muscle, then that would be that short-term goal, but it would have to always factor into your long-term goal, right? So you don't want to do something that's going to negate you from being able to perform at your best when it's time to. So if your goal at the end of the year is to compete and be at your best, you're not going to set up your training to where it doesn't allow you to do that. So if you're doing hypertrophy-based training, which is a higher rep training, and you go straight into trying to get ready for a meet, that's not necessarily going to correlate to being able to lift at your strongest. So making sure that you set up your training in a yearly paradigm to where that's the most important thing is what you want to do. So a lot of people set up their training and they think, well, this is just week 1, and then I go to week 2, and then I go to week 3. What I like to do is start at where you want to end and then work your way back so that you know exactly how the blocks are going to look going into that phase, so everything's planned out to where you can peak at your best. So as far as like structure goes, that's what you want to do. You want to start from where you want to finish and then work your way back. Does that make sense to all you guys? Perfect. And then within the realm of like setting up your programming, you want to think specificity, which is a very important thing when it comes to powerlifting and any other sport that you compete in, because there is technique that needs to be learned within the lift. So having your lift and having your program set up to where it's very specific to the sport that you're trying to be good at is important. So in terms of like powerlifting, what would be specificity when setting up your training program?
Squat, bench, deadlift.
Right, so having your competition squat, your competition bench press with the pause, and then your competition deadlift. That's as specific as it gets in terms of specificity. Then outside of that, you have other compound movements, that kind of variations that will build into that. So when you're setting up your programming and you're a beginner, since this is aimed more at beginners, being able to master that technique is extremely important. So having that in the grand scope of things, like be your main importance into your training, is going to be ideal. You can probably do competition bench, competition squat, competition deadlift for a year straight and still make progress on it because you're still learning the finite techniques of it. So making sure that like as a beginner, that's the most important thing that you do in terms of how you outline your program, and that goes for like the day If it's a squat day, you're doing squats first. You don't do like walking lunges, then squats second. So technique and then the specificity needs to be the first priority in starting off your day. And then as you get closer to the meet, you can also get more dynamic in specificity in doing singles instead of triples and instead of sets of 6. So as the meet gets closer, the more specific you get with the actual rep range as well. So that would go in terms of like when you're long-term picture and you're 16 weeks out, there's really no need to ever do a heavy single or a heavy double because that's more or less testing your strength than it is building. When you're in the gym, you want to build as much as you can going into the meet. So doing things in terms of like hypertrophy training, which is building muscle, that's going to be the basis of how you want to start your initial block of training going into a meet. So that can be anywhere from like 20 weeks out to 16 weeks out to 12 weeks out, depending on how you want to set that up. So you guys familiar with hypertrophy training at all and the term? Yeah, show of hands of who's familiar with it. Okay, so hypertrophy is just like I said, it's just building of muscle, and the rep range to do that in is usually between the 8 to 12 rep range. So when you're setting up your training, you want things to be in that dynamic if you're wanting to build muscle. Anything beyond that, you can still have muscle hypertrophy, but you also go into muscular endurance, right? And then within the human body, you have a couple different muscle fiber types. You have your slow twitch and your fast twitch, and then you have like variations of your fast twitch. So as a power athlete or as a strength athlete, the further you get away from the actual power component of it, the more your actual muscle fibers can start to transform into slower twitch muscle fibers. So the more slow twitch you have, the less power you have. So going into that muscular endurance realm is probably not something that's ever going to be super beneficial to a lifter that's trying to create as much size as possible and create as much strength as possible. So sticking in between the 8 to 12 rep range to build size is a good way to train and plan your hypertrophy training. So how that would look in terms of like setting up your program, it would be more or less having your squat come first and then sticking with like lower body stuff. The next thing you would do is pick another compound movements. Do you guys know what compound movements and isolation movements are and stuff like that? Does anyone?
I don't think everybody does.
No, so a compound movement is like the movement that you can move the most weight with, where you're using both limbs or both arms. So that would be your squats, your bench press, your dumbbell bench press, your deadlifts, things of that nature. Isolations would be like your cables or when you're isolating a single muscle instead of using multiple muscles to move. So having your compound movements come first are going to be crucial because if you have them afterwards and fatigue sets in, then you're more likely to get injured because compound movements where you're using as much muscle as possible to move as much weight as possible, you want to do that in the least of fatigue state as possible to make sure that injury doesn't come about. So when you're fatigued and towards the end of the workout, that's why you'll notice things like cable push downs or band pull aparts or side raises, because the likelihood of you being injured on those exercises while you're fatigued is very minimal. So making sure that everything kind of sets within that paradigm of like you're trying to build muscle, your hypertrophy training should all be based around those numbers. So even your secondary movements and your third movements and your fourth movements should all be kind of based around that paradigm of hypertrophy, right? That way everything you do within that block is geared towards putting on as much size as you can before going into your next block of training. So as far as block training goes, it's kind of the easiest way to talk about training. There's a million other ways of training, and they can all be very effective, but in terms of like this seminar and what we want to really dig into, we can't really go too much into that, but just know like what we learned today, there's other ways of doing it. This is not just the only way to do it, and that's anything in general. Like I know people go to seminars or they hire a coach and they think that like that's the expert, so obviously whatever they say must be true and everything else that everyone else says is probably wrong. Well, that's never the case. Like there's a million ways to get stronger. Brandon can train one way and get really strong. I can train the complete opposite way and get really strong. It's just a matter of like knowing what you're doing within that training program to peak for the meet. And that's why it's important to have like the blocks in there. So you can do things like conjugated training instead of just block periodization, but as long as you're setting up for it to be like hypertrophy based, then you can still make good progress, and you still have the specificity of the actual movements. You can make good progress there as well. So once you get through that initial block of hypertrophy training, right, you have fatigue, and you have fatigue accumulation, and that's why we have deloads. And are you guys familiar with deloads at all? So a deload is just at a certain point in time when you're training, you're starting to accumulate fatigue, and there's a bell curve to it to where eventually you have to get rid of the fatigue in order for you to go even higher than when you started. So that's kind of what a deload is. It's a way for you to drop fatigue so that you can continue to progress. If fatigue continues to occur and you don't drop it, then you have a higher chance of getting injured, and then you have also a higher chance of regression. So more is not always better. Like there has to be a finite line of where like that threshold is of progress, right? So being able to kind of set that up within your program is important as well. When you're doing higher volume stuff, you can deload, every 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the person. And then if you're doing more of the heavier strength training stuff, you can deload like every 3 to 4 weeks. The main thing is not getting to the point where there's no return, right? When you're already beat up and you're already hurt, then you have to deload. Well, that's probably not ever going to be just enough to get you going in the right direction again. So making sure that your training is set up in a very smart, analytical way to where the deloads are there, not when you need them, but just in case you need them. So it's better to drop fatigue before it gets to the point of injury is kind of what I'm getting at when it comes to the structure of things. And then so after every block, you have a deload before you get into your next block. So if you're doing hypertrophy training in the sets of 8 to 12 rep range, and your next block you want to focus on strength training, well, you build strength in the 4 to 6 rep range. So then you will start to drop the reps down. As the reps drop, the intensity goes higher. And intensity is just the weight lifted within the given set. So ideally each week you want to increase the volume, right? And volume is weight times reps times sets. Each week you should be able to do a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's the way you monitor progress. If there's a point in time where that progress starts to dip, then that's a good sign that fatigue is high, and it's probably a good thing to deload if you don't have that already programmed in. So progressive overload is a good driving force of like how to know that you're going in the right direction of making progress. So if you did, a good example would be if you did 135 for 3 sets of 8, and the next week you did 155 for 3 sets of 8, you've done more in terms of total volume throughout the week. So that's why it's important to have like a notebook to track and make sure that you're keeping track of like actual progression week to week. Because if you're not progressing, then you're not getting stronger. I mean, that's a pretty given fact. Yeah. There's no point in time where if you're losing strength that magically it's gonna come back after X amount of time off. Like it just has to continue to be there. And if it gets to that point where it doesn't, that's just you kind of knowing that you're at a volume threshold that you can't maintain, right? You can't, and everyone has different thresholds of where they can push volume and where they can't push volume, and that's kind of up to the person to figure out on their own. Everyone has a maximum recover volume where they can hit that upper threshold, and that's a genetic component. That's also a training history component. So for instance, like I may be able to do 30 sets of bench press and still make progress, where DJ may only be able to do 20 sets and still make progress. So if he went to 30 sets to try to keep up, his progress would hinder because he's not able to recover from that. So recovery is the biggest driving force when it comes to setting up your program. It doesn't matter what you do in the gym, if you can't recover from it, then you're at a deficit when you go back in the next day. So making sure when you do set up your training that those are some of the things that you keep in mind is like, you don't need to squat 4 times a week if you can't recover from it. You don't need to bench 3 times a week if you can't recover from it. You need to do the least amount possible to get the most amount of progress, because there's gonna be a point in time where you have to do more to get more. And if you're already at that peak threshold of doing as much as you can, then you're gonna be stalled out for a very long time. So making sure that when you set up your program that that's a key component to look at week to week is like, how am I able to progress week to week? And that can be so many ways. The one way is the load, like we talked about. Let's say you did 135 for 3 sets of 6. The next week you did it for 4 sets of 6. You still made a progression. Or if you did it for 3 sets of 8, there's still a progression there. So there's a million ways to progress. You just want to make sure that you're doing that and that you're keeping track of that throughout the training cycle. Now there does come a point in time which going into the next phase of training would be like your strength phase. Like I said, it's the 4 to 6 rep range. So you'll go into your hypertrophy, you'll deload, and then you'll go into your strength phase. And this is in the dynamic of, say, anywhere from 16 weeks out to 20 weeks out. So you can run blocks together. You can do a hypertrophy, deload, hypertrophy, as long as it fits within the continuum of getting ready for that meet, right? As the meet gets closer, you want to get less and less or more and more away from the actual hypertrophy training and closer to the heavier training so that your body can get accustomed to it as well. So after you deload, you have the strength phase, and then that's the 4 to 6 rep range. And then we're sticking with the same specificity of the competition movements. And then, like I said, your second movements are the drivers of your weaknesses to help build on your compound movement and your main movement. So if you have weak quads, it may be a good idea to do things like front squats or leg press or high bar tempo squats to build up your quad strength. So it's up to you as a lifter to kind of figure out where your weaknesses are and then build them from there. But a good train of thought is if you're gonna squat, probably like a squat variation would be the next best thing to build that up. And then maybe a hip hinge, so like a stiff leg deadlift or a good morning, and then maybe some unilateral work, because everything we do as powerlifters is with both legs on the ground. So anytime you can like bring balance and stability into an actual movement, that's crucial for longevity and health as well. So you can have more of those type of movements in during a hypertrophy phase. As you move closer to the meet and go into the strength phase, you start to drop a lot of those extra accessories. So you don't want to do things like push downs and like single leg press and stuff like that as you're going into a meet. You want it to be focused more on 4 sets of 6 squats. And then after that, doing like 3 sets of 5 front squats. And then after that, doing a hip hinge. And if anyone's lifted weights for X amount of time, those 3 movements at like 12 sets are probably gonna take you an hour and a half, and you're gonna be done afterwards and probably not wanna do anything else. So that's a good gauge of like where you should be at during that phase. Like I said, when you start to factor in things like actual load, then you have to look at things like your central nervous system, right? Whenever you're doing a hypertrophy phase, fatigue is more of a variable of what you need to deload because you're not going so heavy, so your central nervous system isn't taxed as hard. So being able to drop during your deload, drop that volume, that'll help recover some of the fatigue that you accumulated. As you get into the strength phase and the weights are heavier and intensity is a lot higher, you have to think of your central nervous system as well. So when you do deload, you also want to deload your intensity along with the volume so that you have more of a full body recovery and not just a volume reduction and fatigue recovery. So as the weight gets heavier, your central nervous system gets fried even more, and a good way to know like when that is like if you start to not be able to sleep as well, or if you start to lose your appetite, or if you start to lose your desire to come to the gym. Those are good signs that you might want to deload the next week. And then also in terms of like if you're not making progress again. So that's even a driving factor as you get into your strength training as well. But the one thing you got to focus on in strength training phase is that the volume may not be able to increase, right? There has to come a point in time where you can't just add more weight. So then you have to start to reduce the amount of sets and the amount of reps that you do. So if you do 3 sets of 5 at like 300, and the next week 350 may seem like a big jump. So instead of doing the 5 reps, you may have to drop it down to the 3 reps, because as you get closer to the competition, the weight is more important than the actual amount of sets and reps that you do. So being able to increase the weight is going to be exponentially more important than increasing the volume as a whole. So making sure that you're still focused on increasing the weight in that strength phase and decreasing the reps and volume is going to be very crucial when setting up that block. And then you'll find things like variations throughout training, and that could be strength, hypertrophy, peaking. For beginners, variations aren't the greatest idea because you only have a certain amount of capacity within the human body to master a technique. So if you have a bunch of different techniques going in at once, your ability to actually be good at the one you're trying to be good at is very limited. If you're doing squats and then you also want to learn how to Olympic lift, well, your squats aren't going to be as proficient as they should be. So if you're doing squats and then you're doing box squats, those are two different motor patterns that your body's trying to learn. So you want to really focus on not having as many variations within that parameter and really focus in on the specificity and the movement pattern that you're trying to dial in. So if you do a variation, you want to make sure that it mimics the actual movement pattern as much as possible. So go into things like a low bar squat and then making sure that your stance is the same and doing like a safety squat bar squat. That would be fine. That would be a decent carryover because it's not so far of a variation as it would be if it was a back squat to a front squat, right? That's a completely different variation, completely different movement paradigm that you'll have to learn. If you keep everything the same and just switch up the bar, that's not a bad variation to do as a secondary movement, because there comes a point in time where you have to be able to still do more, right? So you can do that through various ways. You can do that through the variation, which is not so much preferred if you're a beginner. So another way to do that would be to create more volume without having a variation, if you wanted to do that. Anybody? No. Okay, so that'd be a back down set, right?
A what?
So if you're doing squats and you wanted to be able to do your secondary movement, but not have a BS taxon, you just back down and do the same movement. You just do a little bit less weight, and that gives you more practice time with the actual with the actual movement pattern that you're trying to dial in. So that's a good thing to think about in terms of like exercise selection. The first exercise is going to be your heaviest, and then it's going to get progressively lighter because your fatigued is higher, and two, you want to do your heaviest stuff first because if you do it second, then you're more likely to get injured. So having things that naturally bring the weight down or bring the load down is going to be ideal too. So if you wanted to do like a lighter hip hinge movement, right, and the hip hinge is just kind of bending at the waist and keeping your leg straight, like what would be a good variation if you want to do a hip hinge that would actually lessen the load than an actual stiff leg deadlift?
Good morning. Dumbbells.
Dumbbells, a good morning, right? Because you're still getting the same pattern down, but because of where you actually place the weight or the type of weight, it's going to actually reduce the load. So those are all good ways to like create variation within your training program to get the same stimulus without actually taking away from your competition lifts. So that's extremely important when setting up your program and thinking of things in those terms. And then from there, you get into peaking, right? And the biggest thing with peaking is making sure that you have fatigue management is like the top priority. So you want to make sure that you're recovered as much as possible. So ways to do that would be to lessen the volume. You can do that throughout the day in your workout, or you can actually just drop a workout day too. So say if you're training 5 days a week, if you go to 4 days a week, you've already dropped the volume a lot, so then you're recovering better from the fatigue. If you're benching 3 days a week, you may want to drop it to 2 days a week so that you're able to fully recover better. Because the only thing that matters is your ability to recover before that next session so you're able to hit the weight that you want to hit. So making sure that that's a top priority. So if you did a strength phase and you have 4 exercises, a peaking phase may look like only 2 or 3 exercises. So you would do your heavy squat, then you would do a back down squat, and then you may just do like abs, and that would be it. And that's as very specific as possible. And then as the meet gets closer, you start to do singles instead of doubles, because doing a single rep is more specific than doing 2 reps. So if you wanted to really focus on that, you can do 3 singles instead of 1 set of 3. And you see how like that's more important for getting ready to do a 1 rep max in competition? Because a lot of times people think like you get up to the bar, you do your rep, and you're like, man, I just messed up. I had the strength to do it, but I just messed up. Well, you don't have another chance to do it. So practicing that in the gym is extremely important when it comes down to being able to lift that on the platform. So being able to practice things how you would on meet day by doing the same exact setup every time, by making sure you do the same exact walkthrough in your head every time, whether you do positive affirmation, whether you have somebody like smack you, whether you do ammonia, like all the crazy stuff that you guys see, make sure like that is a continued paradigm within your training so that the consistency's there. You don't want to get to the meet and like smell ammonia for the first time, because that's going to be a bad day for you. That's not going to go well. So making sure that you at least try something before you actually get to the meet so it doesn't hinder your ability to perform. So peaking is just that, is like making sure that you're doing singles and that you're really reducing the volume. So you may have done 3 sets of 4 reps, and then peaking may look like 3 singles. So that's a huge reduction in actual volume so that you're able to recover. And then your accessory work would look more or less the same. Instead of doing singles, you may just do triples. So everything gets reduced down as far as volume goes so that you're able to recover. And what that'll allow you to do is, it's called a super compensation. So as your fatigue gets higher, and so this is your fatigue, and then obviously this is your strength. So as fatigue gets higher, your strength can climb, but if fatigue continues to go, then your strength starts to plummet. So you have to end up reducing fatigue so that you're able to super compensate and be able to perform at the meet day. So having your performance go down is a good indicator that you probably need some type of deload in there. And then as you become a better lifter, you'll be able to kind of plan that out more, because I don't think there's ever a point in time where I've gotten better to the point where my deload was able to get pushed out further. It kind of like sits around the same point in time every time for that person, because your maximum recovered volume never changes. So as far as programming goes, do you guys have any specific questions about that before we move on to the next topic? I know it was a good bit in a short amount of time.
If your coach gives you, like, say, your prescribed number of sets and reps, and you start to do your workout, and you have a plan that you want your volume to increase this week from last week from like this very similar workout, but for some reason you're fatigued or whatever, and the weight just seems too heavy, would you try to drop the weight and then do more sets in order to achieve the same or more volume for that week, or would you just like call it like it's gonna be an L that day?
Yeah, you would just reduce the actual load, but without increasing the volume to match the volume that you wanted. It's just a sign that you're fatigued, and you just do what you can based on either the percent or the RPE, and then from there, the next week you'll probably deload. Or there's a lot of things that can go into having a bad day, so it's up to you as a lifter to know if like you slept good, or if you ate good, or if you had good, a lot of water, or if you had a fight with your girlfriend. Anything like that can increase your stress and your cortisol, and can make you have a bad day in the gym. So if it's a one-off instance, then it is what it is. But if it's a continuous paradigm within the week, you just do what you can on the program based on either the percent or the RPE, and then deload the next week, and that'd be more of a clear sign that you need to deload. But if you're already fatigued, you don't want to create more. You don't want to do more to create more fatigue, because then you may put yourself in a hole that you can't get out of.
Even decreasing intensity, if you increase or keep volume, it's going to still have a similar effect of fatigue.
Volume is more of a driver than a fatigue than the actual load is.
Okay.
So if you do more volume just to meet it and drop the weight, that's probably going to create more fatigue for you than it would be to do the heavier weight with less volume. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? No? Okay. So as far as mistakes go for going into a meet, or kind of just in general for getting stronger, trying to cut weight for a meet is usually never a good idea for beginners. The likelihood of you being as strong as you could be while trying to drop weight is never going to happen. The best in the world do it, and you'll notice that if a guy is trying to break an all-time world record, his lifts may look a lot better in the gym, but then come meet day, he just does enough to break an all-time record, but he probably lost 100 pounds on his total, but he was already strong enough that nobody really noticed. You don't want to go to a meet and it'd be your first meet and you cut a bunch of weight, and then you're only able to hit your openers because you've reduced your ability to actually perform that day, right? So calories and water and everything drives performance. A good indicator would be, and this would be like maybe 3 years into lifting, but like a 5%, like a 3 to 5% weight drop for females is fine. A 5 to 7% weight drop for males is fine. Jessica, how much did you drop for your last strongman competition?
22.
Yeah, so, and how did you feel that day? And you did everything right, but did you feel like as best as you could have?
No, I would have won if I had done it.
Right, but you wouldn't have made weight, so then, yeah. So performance always is a factor. So it has to come a point in time where you're either a good enough athlete to where you can take that 5% drop and still win, or not. And if you're never at that point where you're at or not, then just don't do it. Because it's not worth it to have such a good training cycle, cut weight, and then it be ruined that day because it's a 24-hour weight cut. And not only in terms of like weight cut, because if you're not familiar with powerlifting, you have 24 hours to weigh in, or 2 hours, depending on the federation. So a weight cut would be like you drop 20 pounds in a week, right? Or like through 2 days.
It was 9 days.
9 days, right?
A day was 11 pounds.
Yeah, I've dropped 25 in 24 hours. So that's what like a water cut is. Now, going into meat, you also don't want to be dieting either. You don't want to be in a calorie deficit when you're trying to be at your strongest too. So making sure that when you do set up your program and you structure it out, if you want to lose weight, try to do it at a point in time where you're in hypertrophy as well, to where that weight loss isn't going to affect your overall strength. And then as you get closer to the meet, your calories should be a little bit higher to where you're in a slight surplus. So say a good rule of thumb would be at like 8 weeks out, whatever weight you're at, or whatever you want to compete at, that should be where your weight's at, 8 weeks out. So you have 8 weeks to train with the weight that you're going to compete at. And that's a good rule of thumb. So if your diet doesn't go according to plan and you're not at that weight, then it is what it is. You know, just compete and have fun. But making sure that you time your programming with your nutrition is extremely important as well. Because if you're dieting into a show, it's going to be very annoying that like you're losing weight and then you're also losing strength. And then it also gets to that point where like there's no return. You've already lost 50 pounds. Eating like a jackass and gaining 10 pounds is only gonna make you feel more like a jackass, and you're not gonna get stronger either. So making sure that you find that threshold of like, and it could be the same paradigm as the weight cut. If you're trying to drop weight, 3 to 5% for females is a good drop in weight in like a 3-month phase. If you can't get to that point in 3 months, then just stop, bring your calories back up, and then wait until you're at a good point again to try it again. So everything needs to be done in a long-term approach, and that's really hard for lifters to do, because a lot of us all we see is like, we got 12 weeks to get ready for the next meet, and that's the most important thing in our life, and that's the only thing that matters. It's like, well, if you would have thought that way, like, I don't know, 2 years ago, getting ready for this meet, then you probably would have been better off than at 12 weeks out. So making sure everything's like at a long-term approach when you start to set things up is going to be important. So don't wait until it's too late to do things, because then it never turns out well. And then also another mistake is peaking too often. Like a lot of beginners, it's good to compete a lot to get practice, because there is something to be said about like practice with the lifts and practice under competition. But if you're constantly peaking for these meets and not just kind of training through them, then you're gonna have a smaller window to actually grow. Because like I said, when you get into like a peaking phase and you're doing singles and doubles and triples, you're not really building your strength, you're just testing it. When you're doing things like your strength phase and your hypertrophy phases, that's when you're building a foundation, right? Just like a pyramid, the bigger your foundation, the higher the peak. So if you're constantly at a phase where you're not ever building and you're just peaking, then you're never gonna get a bigger foundation. So making sure if you do wanna do a bunch of meets throughout the year because you wanna practice at them, don't peak for it all the time. Just kind of train right through it, you know, tie it up with the strength phase to where at least you're at some strength, you practice the meet, no expectations, and then you just do it. If you also too, like I personally think a good competitor, anyone in general, you probably peak at your all-time best like 1 or 2 times a year. The better you get, probably once a year. So try not to waste that with like meaningless meets and stuff is extremely important. You know, don't do something, well that'll get into the next topic, like going off plan, and that happens a lot. And that like, oh, we have an event at the gym, I better max out today. Well, no, like you're 8 weeks out from your meet. What good is it to you to max out right now? Like, because you have like 10 people like your post on Instagram. Like, you gotta lift for like more of a longevity and long-term approach. So making sure that you stick to the plan, because it happens a lot. People will do their workouts and like, I felt good today, so I pushed it. Not knowing like pushing it that day affects the next week, which will affect the next week, right? So if you push it that day and then the next week is harder, well then that's gonna make the next week harder. So then you're at a deficit going into all these other weeks that you're supposed to be building into because you felt good that day. It's like, yeah, you're supposed to feel good that day. That means the program's working. Don't go off the program. And making sure that you kind of stick to those things and those basic fundamentals will allow you to be ready when you're supposed to be ready and not have to, if you have to deload more often because you're training like a jackass all the time, then you're not gonna have as much time to get better. And then making sure that you're not maxing in the gym. Like I said, that's more of a test of strength than an actual building of strength. So if your program says set to 5 and you're like, oh, I'm gonna do a single today just to see where I'm at, well then that kind of defeats the purpose of the rest of the training, and then you have to recover from that more and more. So making sure that you stick to the plan, trust the process, and know that like, you know, you don't need to be at your strongest all the time, you just need to be at your strongest during the meet. So like we were talking about with fatigue accumulation, as your fatigue gets higher, you're not gonna be strong, and that's fine, right? Because you're trying to create an adaptation. You gotta push your body to a threshold that it's never been before in order for it to grow. And when you do that, you might not always be at your all-time strongest, but that's not what the point of that phase is. The point of the phase is to build and build and build. When you get to peaking, that's when you wanna be strong. That's when things matter a little bit more as far as strength goes. So making sure that those mistakes don't get made will help increase your longevity in the sport, and it will increase your progress too, you know. But if you are maxing in your fatigue, you're more likely to get hurt. If you go off plan, you're more likely to get hurt. If you're constantly dieting, you're more likely to get hurt. If you cut a bunch of weight, you're more likely to get hurt. Like, these are all things that will just save you a bunch of health in the long run. The healthier you can be, the stronger you're gonna get over time. This isn't the hardest thing to do. You just lift weights, and if you can lift weights for like 10 years, you'll probably be pretty strong at the end of that. And there's really not much more you need to think about. And then as far as like meet expectation goes, how many people in here plan on competing or are competing? Everyone but Desiree? Okay. So you have, each federation has different rules. So making sure like when you go to compete that you know what the rules are, whether it be strongman, whether it be Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting. You would think it's the same sport, they should all have the same rules. Well, it's not the case. Each federation has its own little unique set of rules to separate them from the other ones. So making sure that you learn as much as you can about the federation that you compete in will help as well, because you don't want to go to a meet and they have commands and you miss the commands and then you don't get the lift, and then what do you do next, right? And it's like, well, if you just would practice the commands and know the rules, then you wouldn't have that issue. So making sure that you know, because like in USAPL, you gotta have your feet flat on the bench, you gotta have your head flat on the bench. If those move, you don't get the lift. So making sure that you know all those rules will allow you to be a lot more confident going into it. And if you're confident going into a meet, you'll be more likely to succeed in the meet. And then also, each lift has or each competition has weigh-ins. So you have to make weight. Some have 2-hour weigh-ins, some have 24-hour weigh-ins. Making sure that you know what you're doing at weigh-ins and after weigh-ins is extremely important. So if you are dropping a little bit of weight and you make weight and you eat like donuts or pancakes afterwards, that's probably not a good thing to do. One, if you're dieting and you go into a meet, you'll probably get, your stomach will be fucked up and then you probably won't even be able to eat the rest of the day. 2, sugar dispels water from your kidneys, so you'll be dehydrated, which is not really something you want to do. So making sure that you don't have sugar in your system while you're trying to rehydrate is probably a good idea. Focusing on things that are like actually going to hold water, like carbs, and things like salt and water, of course. Those are going to be like your biggest driving factors after weigh-ins. So if you're eating a certain way and you introduce new foods into your body after weigh-ins, that's gonna fuck you up for the meet day. So what I usually tell my athletes is focus on eating everything the exact same, just eat more of it after weigh-ins, and then after the competition, you can eat whatever you want because it doesn't really matter. But if you train hard for 12 weeks and you eat like an asshole the day before your competition and you have a bad day, it's gonna be very depressing and upsetting. So you wanna make sure that you don't try to do anything new, and that goes for supplements too. Like you don't wanna do a new pre-workout the day of the meet, because that may not go well. If you guys have ever done pre-workouts before, like sometimes it can make you like tingly and like get blurry vision and like get super red. Like it's not good to do anything new before a competition. And then making sure you know the length of the actual competition too. Powerlifting meets are long, they are very boring. So if you go there, make sure that you have food for the day and you have energy for the day. So caffeine, food that's easy to digest, things like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, protein bars, trail mix, things that aren't gonna sit in your stomach too long. Because if you have a big meal and it sits in your stomach, your digestion is actually gonna mess with the process of being able to lift as much weight as possible. So you want as little bit of food in your body as you can while still being able to perform. So even liquid calories are good too. Things like carbohydrates like waxy maize or dextrose or things like that will be good to drink while you're doing your competition because it fuels, it gives you the energy you need. Plus, it's not sitting in your stomach for a long period of time, so you're not gonna have a lot of issues with that. If you do eat a big meal and it does sit in your stomach, like I said, you're gonna have a lot of issues putting on your belt, getting everything tight. Then you're also gonna have a lot of issues lifting at your maximum strength because you want your body to be solely focused on producing as much force as possible through the movement. If it's trying to digest food, it's not gonna be able to do that. Hydration is extremely important. Like I said, sodium helps drive hydration, and then water, and then carbs. All those help drive hydration into your body and help shuttle things the right way. And you wanna make sure that you have plenty of that to avoid cramps, to avoid injury, and to avoid headaches, lightheadedness, and stuff like that. So making sure that you drink plenty of water and get salt in throughout the day is extremely important. I know a lot of people think that salt's bad and they cut it out of their diet because they think that it's gonna bloat them or whatever the case is, but salt is an extremely important mineral to have in your body. It helps drive protein synthesis, it helps drive hydration, and it helps just create a better system within your body. So making sure that that's all important and in your system all the time is going to be extremely valuable. And then being able to relax at a meet. I know we have a lot of expectations going into meets. We want to hit certain numbers, but we put a lot of stress upon ourselves to do well and not being able to relax. Then that's going to carry over to not being able to perform on the platform or at the show. If you think about it, like every time you get stressed, everything gets really tense. If you're tense all the time, how are you going to be able to like perform at your best? Because you just wasted a lot of energy stressing and being tense. If you're relaxed, you're able to kind of turn that switch, be relaxed after the event, get intense for the event, and being able to put that switch back and forth. But if you're constantly in a high stress situation or you put too much on yourself, or say the first event doesn't go the way you have planned, the rest of the day can be salvaged if you're smart enough to make the right choices in doing that. So as far as meet expectations go, do you guys have any questions about like your first meet and what to expect or anything like that? No? Awesome. All right. So kind of setting yourself up to have like a really good day, going 9 for 9 at a meet. First thing you want to do is you want to have a plan A, and you want to have a plan B for your attempt selection. So don't get married to like your attempts. If you want to hit a 400-pound deadlift and that's the only thing on your mind, and 340 moves like crap, well, you're still going to try to hit 400 pounds even though you have no business doing that, right? So making sure that you have a plan A and a plan B and having that like wherewithal to know my warm-ups aren't going as fast as they should be, as I felt them go before. Maybe today is not going to be a good day. And I know as a lifter, it's hard to do that. It's hard to tell yourself, today is not my day. I messed up the program, something went wrong, and I'm not going to have my best day. Well, you have 9 attempts on powerlifting. You're going to have a really bad day if you only get 3 of them. You'll have a decent day if you get 9 of them, you know? So at least focusing on getting the weight that you can get and not the weight that you expect to get that day is going to be extremely valuable in order for you to actually come away from the meet and enjoy it. So making sure that your attempts are very smart in their selection, and a good way to do that is setting up your training to where you know what your attempt should be. So if you're a beginner, you should know what your opener is, and then a good second attempt would be something that you've already doubled in the gym, right? Your second attempt shouldn't be something that was like a hard single that day, and you're like, oh, if I just rest and recover, I'll be able to add 20 pounds to that. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. So making sure that if you look back on your training and your training logs, that you can see like, okay, this weight was a bad day, but it still moved. So that can be an opener because I can hit it even on a bad day. And another good rule of thumb is like anything you can triple, you should be able to do as an opener even on a bad day. Anything you can double, you should be able to do as your second attempt. And then your third attempt should be a PR of some sort, right? And that's gonna be based on how you feel that day from your attempts. So really focus in on how the attempts feel are gonna be really important in order for you to pick the next attempt, which is why I like to do RP, because it teaches you to be a better intuitive lifter and allows you to know like, today felt good, I was able to hit a PR. Today didn't feel good, I still got my work in. And then you go to the meet, you're like, today feels like that day I hit that PR, so it's gonna be a good day. Today doesn't, but I can probably still salvage it and still get some good numbers put together. And then making sure that you deload before the meet. So if you're someone who's a high frequency, high volume training person going into the meet, it's probably not a good idea to take the whole week off. If you're someone who trains 4 days a week and you take a whole week off, you're gonna become very lethargic and you're gonna become very, lethargic is probably the best way to put it. You're gonna feel slow. You're not gonna have that pop, you're not gonna have that speed that you normally would. So having like a deload be something like 60% of your lifts on Monday and like 50% of your lifts on Wednesday, just to get some blood flow, just to get some type of recovery aspect and then also some technical aspect of it. So it would look like Monday would be squat, bench, and deadlift, 60% for like doubles or triples. Wednesday would be squat, bench, and deadlift, 50% doubles and singles. So as you see, it like gets progressively less and less throughout the week. And then you go from there on meet day. If you're someone that's really strong and you only train like maybe 2 or 3 times a week, you could probably rest the whole week and still be fine. Female athletes, they can push things a little bit further, or if you're not that strong to begin with and like not strong for your size, but actually how much weight you can lift in totality, you can actually push things a little bit further into the week and you can train heavier during your deload, because you also got to think like when you're reducing fatigue and volume, you're also reducing your level of fitness. If your level of fitness gets to a point where it's not stable and it goes below where you want it to be, then you're not going to be able to perform that day either. So if you're a weaker athlete and you're able to kind of push things a little bit further, like you hit your openers on Monday or Wednesday, like you can train pretty heavy going into the meet, you may only need like 2 days rest and you would be fine. And those are for smaller athletes or weaker athletes. So making sure that like you know how you set up your training and what you're gonna do and the type of athlete you are will allow you to deload properly going into the meet. And there is a little bit of trial and error in that as well. So don't think like if you did it one way, that's the perfect way to do it. Like there's always a better way to do something. So kind of thinking outside that paradigm of like, this is what a book told me to do to deload. This is how I always got to deload. And if it doesn't ever feel right, then you should definitely try to change it up for sure. Like I said, lowering your expectations or having none at all is a really good way to have fun at your first couple meets. You know, I know with social media and stuff, everyone puts high expectations on themselves because they have like a couple followers and they think if they do well, that they'll get a couple more. If they do bad, people will talk crap. At the end of the day, no one really cares. The only person that cares is you, and you just need to get over that, drop all expectations, have fun, do the best you can, and that's all that really matters. If you put in the effort, it'll be a fun day. And make sure when you go to meets to have fun, to talk to other lifters, to get to know people, to see where they came from, to help each other out, and to just cheer each other on and stuff, because that's kind of what the whole sport is. Like, at the end of the day, you're going to a competition, you're just lifting weights. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You should be able to have fun, you should be able to talk to other people, you shouldn't sit in a corner with your headphones on and like silence and like, you know, getting such anger and rage that you don't talk to anyone the whole day, and then like after the meet's over, you're like, oh man, I wish I would've took pictures or talked to people. It's like, well, you had that chance, like, and you blew it, you know. And being able to find like what kind of lifter you are is extremely important too, and knowing what works best for you may not work best for everyone else. You may be more introverted and not talk to people, but definitely don't let that hinder your experience in what you're trying to do, because it is a lot of fun getting to meet people and lift weights and stuff. So, you guys have any questions about any of that stuff at all?
When do you have to tell them your openers?
Everyone's different. Usually you tell them at weigh-ins. So that's another thing for like what to expect at weigh-ins. You usually give them your openers. You also have your equipment check. So everything you're gonna wear at the meet belt, knee sleeves, shoes, underwear, t-shirts, all that needs to be shown to the judges. You can't be like, oh, I have a t-shirt, it's just not in my bag. Well, that's probably not gonna work. And then getting your heights too on your squat and bench. So making sure that you do that with the actual equipment you're gonna lift in. So if you have a big arch and you go to get like your rack height and you're just like laying flat, that's gonna suck when you go to do the meet and like, oh, it's not where I wanted it to be. Well, because you didn't take your time getting set up. And if you're like, get your squat height and you're in flip flops, but then you wear heels, it's gonna be a lot different when you have your heels on. So making sure that you have all your equipment on that you were gonna wear, besides obviously belt, knee sleeves and stuff. You don't need to put your wraps on to get rack height. But making sure that like you do that with the equipment that you're gonna have on so that everything's perfect and you don't need to adjust it. So that's one of the expectations for weigh-ins. And then you give them your openers. Usually some people will ask you for your openers a week out so they can make the flights too. I've seen more than a week out, but it never makes sense because you don't know your openers at like 4 weeks out. Yeah. Any other questions about anything? Yep.
Do you wear your singlet on weigh-ins, or what do you wear for weigh-ins?
Depends on how much weight you want to weigh. You can go naked. It's usually your underwear. Yeah. If you don't really need to make weight, you can just wear like regular clothes, gym clothes, but you don't have to wear your singlet. It is a good idea though too, if you're not comfortable in a singlet, to wear it in like your last couple weeks of training, just to get used to it and get comfortable with it. So Brandon wears it all the time. He probably has it on right now.
I do.
Yeah.
Work, gym, everywhere.
Yeah. So
Always
that's
ready.
weigh-ins are just if you need to make weight, you can weigh in naked. If you don't need to make weight, you can weigh in your gym clothes. Usually they have, if you're female, they'll have a female referee weigh you in. If not, you can ask for one if you don't feel comfortable. You can make sure that you ask for one because they should provide that. If they don't, that can be a very big issue. And I know some gyms are like that, but they should have a female there to weigh you in if you don't feel comfortable with it. Any other questions about anything besides the meet, programming, anything at all? No? All right. Well, you guys are officially experts at powerlifting. Congratulations. If you guys want to stick around and go over any of your lifts, you can feel free to do that. We'll be here probably for another like 45 minutes to an hour if you want to. And you can get technique and get critique by the coaches. If not, that is it for today. Thanks again, guys, for coming out. I appreciate it.